Hello everybody, my name is Grandmaster Illia Nyzhnyk and I welcome you guys to the Chess Legacies lecture series where I present my favorite chess players of the past. Hello wonderful people in the audience. Today I'm going to be talking about Grandmaster and world champion Tigran Petrosian. I have personally drawn a lot of inspiration from Petrosian's games. And although he is known as a defensive giant, if you will, a type of player who almost never loses games and possesses exceptional defensive capabilities, what I would like to show you today is actually on the contrary of what is believed, and that is that Tigran Petrosian's understanding of the game was not only in his defensive skills, but also in his understanding of, let's say, dynamic sacrifices or effective attacking or endgame understanding. And these are the things I would like to demonstrate today alongside some of his best defensive games also. So I'm not going to be showing the entire games. I do have 4 examples, and knowing my presenting speed, I'll try to be fast about it, because I do have 4 positions that I would like to show. This is position number 1, where Tigran Petrosian is playing against Octavio Troianescu with black pieces, and this is one of the cases where Petrosian demonstrated an exceptional positional understanding, and was white to play, and white having played the move knight to e3, hitting the black rook on c4. It feels a little bit wasteful to pull the rook back to c5. Because it kind of gets stuck here without any usage immediately. If the rook ends up on a4, similar story. The rook just doesn't sit well with the dynamics of the position to have a rook so misplaced. So Petrosian performs what is known as a positional sacrifice, and goes ahead and takes on e4, sacrificing the exchange. White has nothing better than to take. And after bishop takes e4, this is, talking from personal experience, getting a position like this would be a dream of mine, because it has everything I like: the bishop pair, the strong center, the ability to play against your opponent's weak king. So these things combined not only give black full compensation, but also make it so that black's long-term advantage is only going to be growing bigger if this position is handled with the care it requires. So Petrosian's opponent goes ahead and plays the move knight c2, trying to de-escalate and maybe potentially bring the knight over to d4, where it's going to be holding white's position together. The d4 is arguably the best square for the white knight as of this moment. Also, it's going to be used. The knight is going to be used to block any potential checks against the white king from the queen's side. So Petrosian is unfazed, goes ahead and plays the move d5. Now his opponent responds knight d4. And here, it's tough to advise black anything other than the pawn minority attack, which is exactly what Petrosian is going for here. The move b4 was played, and once again, it's hard to propose anything better, as the first step should be getting rid of the annoying knight on d4, and that can be done by loosening one of the main defenders, which is the c3 pawn. So Petrosian goes ahead and plays the move b4. Trades go through. I feel like maybe taking on b4 was a little bit premature. I think Petrosian's opponent should have tried to keep the pawn on c3 and maybe play something like, my apologies, something like rook to c1, really trying their best to hold the c3 pawn on its place. But obviously there is a lot of potential attacks black can add against the pawn, and eventually it's going to fall. White's position kind of gets ruined a lot faster now, as they have taken on b4 and loosened up the knight on d4. So takes, black took back, a takes b4, and now white went a4, which is arguably a blunder, but I guess this was probably a distracting maneuver to kind of make black believe that, oh, well, there's a free pawn on a4, let's go ahead and take it. Petrosian once again demonstrates an exceptional understanding that material is sort of irrelevant at this point, and what matters the most is black's ability to slowly suffocate white. This bishop is doing an amazing job once again, taking care of the entire king side. But now white, by taking back on b4 with the c pawn, white has shown an intention of fighting for the c file, and this a4 pawn is used as a decoy. So now if black takes on a4, white will go ahead and play the move rook c1, and you know, it's not so bad, as I say. Knight potentially gets some extra jumps, can go to c6 and maybe reposition itself to e5, and with the c file control, now white can at least hope for some activity. So Petrosian realizes that and goes ahead and plays rook c8, completely erasing this idea from existence. Now, if white wants to fight for the c file control, they would have to somehow find a way to trade rooks, which is pretty much impossible to do, yeah, as this rook is being used as a defender for the knight, so it cannot end up anywhere else other than the d file. If knight moves away, which is exactly what happened eventually, so his opponent played b3. Now Petrosian goes ahead and transfers the bishop over to c5, where it's going to be used as a main hitting force, having built the battery alongside the queen. Now knight finally moves out of the way, going to b5. Now queen a6 comes through, and the bishop c5 is just such a powerful threat. White can't really stop it. Goes ahead, plays queen e2, and they're slowly but surely reaching the critical point. I know I'm going very fast right now, but it's because I'm going to be trying to show all 4 examples I have. I will take a look at the chat after this next move. So queen b6 check, king f1. Obviously, no blocks are available. There's bishop c5, so king goes to f1. And let me go ahead and take a look at the chat, because I see that a lot of people have typed in something. Taking on e4 also gives a new open file, which is good for the one who has 2 rooks. Taking on a4, yes. So the point brought up by Zalex in the chat is that if had black decided to take on a4, then potentially white could also look to utilize the newly opened a file to get more activity. So that's a good point. So let's go here. And after the move king f1, this is a critical position in the game, where once again, oftentimes what ends up happening when your pieces are good is that you have to start looking for the final push, for the final pressing, to push for to try and close out the game. And this is exactly the moment where if black does not find this following idea, it's really difficult for them to bring the game to the logical conclusion. So Petrosian goes ahead and plays yet another rook sacrifice, going rook to c3, offering a lot of material for seemingly no reward. But this is going to be one of those cases where, you know, sometimes it does happen occasionally that pieces of a much lesser value overpower pieces of a much higher value, and that's exactly going to be the case here. Ignoring this rook is not advised. It's currently threatening rook f3 check, was basically a winning tactic, or just going ahead and taking on b3 would probably suffice as well. So white really has no choice. Our RL, good job spotting rook c3. So white goes ahead and takes on c3, black takes back. Now we can already see where this is going. Black is behind in material, but black has amazing pieces. The bishop on e4 is just taking care of everything and everyone. The pawn is running all the way. The bishop is able to jump in and help the c pawn promote. Plus, white is about to lose both of their queenside pawns. So looking pretty grim here for white. White goes rook c2, hoping, praying that maybe black will get baited and trade one of their best pieces for one of white's arguably worst pieces, aka the rook. So didn't happen. Unfazed, Petrosian goes ahead and takes on b3, sticking to the plan. Right, we're trying to give this c3 pawn a final push. Rook ec1, and once again bishop to b4. right? We are not trading off one of our best pieces, even if it means winning back some of the missing material. We are really focused, we are locked in on this plan that we want to get as much as possible. Just getting a single exchange for our amazing bishop on e4 is not going to be enough, right? So Petrosian really pushes to get more out of it. His opponent goes g4, and I guess here, I'm honestly not exactly sure, but here Petrosian does end up taking on c2, maybe perceiving that he is going to be winning a lot of material back, but he could have just taken on a4. I think this is the first time where I kind of disagree with his decision to take. He has improved his position, but he can keep the pressure going by taking on a4. The rook, maybe he was afraid that the rook is going to get a little bit active, but I don't think this is much of anything. So at this point of time, black is threatening c2, black is threatening bishop to a3, so I feel like this would probably be a better way to go about it. But yet he goes ahead and takes on c2. Now, if queen takes c2, maybe this is his point. Maybe he wasn't very keen on taking on c2 because of queen takes c2. This would be a valid response, giving black a little bit more defense against the c3 pawn. But after bishop b4, g4, now taking on c2 with a queen results in queen c4, and black is going to go ahead and start picking up pawns on the king's side. At this point of time, like, how are we doing material-wise? Oh, okay, so black is up 1 point of material since black has bishop and six pawns against the rook and 3 pawns. So as is, right now, black is already up, plus the position is crushing. Yeah, so d4, e5, e4, the pawns are running, there's no stopping them, and the game is likely going to end. So this is probably the point where Petrosian is like, okay, I'm just going to start cashing out. Yeah, he's about to start taking stuff, and here comes queen takes a4. I guess he believes that the d pawn is not going to be, white's not going to be able to stop that. So in cases like these, right, when you are in trouble, you do need to look for ways to complicate the game, and this is exactly what white is doing, trying to go for this f5 breakthrough. There is really no other way. You have to make sure your pieces get active. Otherwise, you're slowly dying. You're slowly losing because of lack of material or other reasons. So f5 is a great attempt. Unfortunately, it is not going to be enough as Petrosian takes on f5, goes ahead and plays g5, making sure the king's side is solidified, where there is no open files. White cannot attack the king on the g file. If anything, the bishop is ready to be pulled back, giving the h6 pawn and the black king additional support. So once again, his opponent does go for the h4, desperately trying to offer some material and looking for something to justify the passivity of both of the heavy pieces. But Petrosian isn't phased, goes ahead and plays bishop c5, and again, this is just a simple calculation at this point, where if you can calculate that after queen f4, queen g3, you're going to be winning, then the game becomes very easy. So the rest of the game is just a simple tactical calculation, which results in white losing. Once again, he can also just keep the queens on the board. This is just Petrosian being overly safe. He is having a winning endgame here, thanks to the fact that c3 pawn is invulnerable. But I feel like queen to d4 would have won a lot faster, because the king has nowhere to hide, and there is always going to be check. So if the king goes to c1, I believe there's bishop a3 check, here bishop b4 check, here, and now I think queen a4 is the winning move, where we have discovery checks that white cannot escape. If queen c3, we just end up winning the queen. So this would be a little bit faster, but once again, just to keep himself safe, Petrosian does transpose into the winning endgame and wins it with no problem whatsoever. So the bishop gets repositioned. Take a look at how the bishop gets repositioned to e5, where it can be both a supporting defensive piece and an attacking piece, in the sense that it's going to be helping our pawn promote. So the rest is fairly simple. It takes time, right? You should make sure that whenever you are finding yourself in a winning endgame like this, that you take your time, because there is always something to be worried about. Your opponent is not just going to let you win games, for free. There is always going to be some kind of trick, and you do need to make sure you defend against it. So take your time, play slow whenever you are in a winning endgame, unless it's a time-sensitive situation, which is I would say rather rare in endgames of this nature, where you have your opponent only has one piece and you have a piece and a bunch of pawns. Usually you want to make sure your pawns move in unison so that they have a higher chance of promoting. So this is the game number 1. I really like this game because of you know, 2 amazing position sacrifices, which means that, you know, Tigran Petrosian is not only, you know, a fully defensive player, but he also has a very strong dynamic understanding of where material is not as important, you know, as other things, as other intangible things such as control. That's example number 1. Any questions? Vaha, where am I from? I'm from Ukraine. No questions? All right, let's move on. So positional sacrifices are not the only strengths that Petrosian possessed. He was also very sharp as it came to attacking, especially when the attack was semi-forced. What I mean by semi-forced is that good sometimes whenever your pieces are placed properly, good moves and ideas just kind of flow into your head, and that's precisely what happened in this game where Petrosian was playing against Vasily Smyslov. I believe this game was probably a game from one of their matches. And in this position, which seems to be relatively even, with only difference that white has placed their pieces in a very aggressive manner, and that's the thing that is going to, yeah?
When you move your bishop to h7, then the king captures, then you move your queen to c2.
Well, this is just a check, right? You're giving up the bishop. I would say that it's probably not worth giving up the bishop for just a simple check, yeah? So at this point, this idea is correct. We do want to target the h7 square, but we have actually a much more effective way to do it. We can do exactly what Petrosian did, and he spotted that his bishops are both looking towards the king side, so why not just create a battery? Goes ahead and plays the move queen e4. Very simple, yeah? Batteries are some of the most effective ways to support your attack. And here, black actually doesn't have a good response to it. Black is forced to play g6, as if our queen ends up on h7, it's pretty much game over. So goes ahead and plays g6. Queen g4 comes through. Queen g4 has once again a pretty simple idea of taking on g6. The goal here is to break black's king side pawn structure as much as possible, so that, you know, attacking becomes easier. Whenever you are attacking your opponent's king, it is an essential step to look for ways to break up that pawn shield that's guarding your opponent's king. So this is exactly what Petrosian is going for, and actually there is no good defense against bishop captures g6. If black tries something along the lines of king h7, I believe that now as the king is on this x-ray, white might be having some extra ideas such as h4, h5, plus also bishop takes g6 might still be possible, as f takes, queen takes e6. Our pieces are all coming in. Now queen f7 is a checkmating threat, so black would probably have to go rook f8 and then rook d7, hitting the bishop. If black defends, we have knight e5 hitting one of bishop's main defenders. This just does not look good for black whatsoever. It feels like black is getting significantly overwhelmed, and their pieces are misplaced, so they can't be pulled towards the king side's defense fast enough. So h5 was found by Vasily Smyslov, where the move does force white's queen onto h3, and the ideas remain the same. Bishop takes g6 is a big threat that actually black once again does not have a good response to. So Smyslov goes ahead and plays the move f5, which makes a funny little snake-like pawn structure on the king side now. But this is one of the issues of moving your pawns carelessly. Not only are you exposing some squares, so at this point the g5 and e5 squares are now outposts, which arguably cannot really be used as of right now, but in the future it's very likely white is going to get to use one of these squares for their attack. But also the pawns that were previously defending each other are now fairly weak. Yeah, so in this case it's the e6 and g6 pawns that can now be targeted by other pieces that wasn't the case previously. So Petrosian goes ahead and plays bishop c4, targeting the e6. There is once again pretty much only one chance for black to defend, which is to play king f7. Smyslov throws in a rook trade before king f7 comes through. Whenever you're getting attacked, it is usually a good idea to trade your opponent's pieces, right? Because you wanna make sure you are safe. A sure way to do that is to trade and hope that your opponent is going to run out of steam. Yeah, if you trade your opponent's attacking pieces, eventually they may run out of steam and you will survive. So that's exactly what Smyslov is going for, trying to trade whenever he has a chance. But unfortunately, having the king on f7, having weak pawns like these, having weak outposts, it just does not end well. And Petrosian, in a true spirit of this position, realizes that material is not everything. He needs to expose that center. He needs to expose the e file so that there can be a final blow delivered against the e6 pawn. Goes ahead and plays e4. This is not even a positional sacrifice per se, yeah, because black cannot really take on e4, as there's queen takes e6 now. So e4 is just an undermining move that makes black's life significantly harder. Queen f4 was a nice resource found by Smyslov, because now if white takes on f5, there is a bishop hanging, so c4 would fall. And yet, there is no need to hurry. Once again, all the preparations have been made. Petrosian goes ahead and plays rook e1. I wouldn't be surprised if he had enough time to pull the bishop back and then capture the f5. But I don't think it comes to that, because his opponent goes queen g4, and actually this is, I kind of take it back. At this point, if we do allow the queen trade, we might just run out of steam. Yeah, because if we just end up taking on g4, black would take back with an f pawn, not with an h pawn, because then we have e takes f5 and the e6 is going to fall. So f pawn would take, and we've placed the rook on e1 for no reason at all. Yeah, in this case, the rook cannot be on an open file as we fail to trade the e4 pawn, and our attack comes to halt. I feel like black has successfully survived here. So there is a sense of urgency here for white. The queen trade cannot be allowed, and this is why another positional sacrifice comes in. Petrosian goes ahead and takes on f5, which quote-unquote blunders the bishop. Obviously not the case. If black still goes for the trade, massive material losses are occurring. Bishop takes e6, intermezzo with a check. King would probably escape somewhere to f8. Now white takes this queen back. White is already up 2 pawns. White is hitting the rook. White is hitting the pawn. Everything is hanging. White is going to end up a lot of material, probably at least 3 points. And plus, as soon as white takes on g6, it is very likely that the pawn is just going to promote. I think it actually is promoting. At g7, g8, there's no stopping it. So queen trade cannot come through. Smyslov is forced to take on c4. And now f takes g6, not f takes e6. We want to make sure that e6 remains a target for our pieces. As soon as we take f takes e6, our rook becomes dull, right? Because it actually would be better off if the e6 pawn didn't exist whatsoever, because then our rook can be used for attacking purposes. Here, the e6 is a nice little shield that we've provided graciously to our opponent. We can't have that. Very important to take on g6 now. And obviously, if king takes g6, which didn't happen, black is getting mated. Rook e6, queen f5, and the king just cannot escape. So it says the king begins running at this moment, right now. Now, as g6 pawn survives, it actually becomes white's main win condition. Right? It just goes to g7. Black tries for e5, hoping to prevent the promotion, but to no avail. Queen takes h5, rook d1 check. And now the king actually cannot even run off. The king would love to run off towards the b8, but it doesn't make it on time. Just one move too short. Chess is a tragedy of a single tempo. Yeah, as who said that? Wilhelm Steinitz? I'm not quite sure. Maybe somebody from the chat can help me out. But that's exactly the case here. Bishop d6 doesn't really do much for black, as bishop takes e5 still comes through. Smyslov goes for some random last chance type of sacrifice, knight d4, hoping that maybe rook takes d4 comes through and he's going to win by giving a checkmate on the first rank. But obviously that's foolish to assume that that can ever happen in a game as as high of a level as this one. So knight takes d4 and Smyslov resigns as he is down a lot of material. His king is in the center and there is really no hope left for him. So example of amazing attacking game that Petrosian had, and this is not the only thing he did well. Once again, position sacrificing, very good feeling for attacks, and now another demonstration of his superior endgame understanding. One of his games, one of his World Championship match games against Mikhail Botvinnik, this position was reached, by the way. Sorry for once again going too fast. I'm trying my best to make it on time. House of Gao was asking about the bishop sack. Well, there was actually no need for the bishop sack, as we could see. Just simple attacking moves involving the queen were enough to make it work for Petrosian in the previous example. So in this endgame, once again, this is something that I constantly preach about in my own lectures. The piece synergy is very, very important, especially in the endgame. Rook plus bishop piece synergy is exceptional because of how well they work with each other. So in this position right here, the second c4, okay, well, it did go through, yes. Yeah, the second c4 did happen. So in this position here, white seemingly has exhausted their attacking capabilities, right? Because white has exceptional battery going on against the g6 pawn, but black seems to be defending it just fine. White would love to play maybe a move like f5, but it just leads to trades and white dropping a pawn for no reason, something like this maybe. So there's no real way to undermine or provide additional attack against the g6 pawn as of right now. So this is where Tigran is trying to think outside of the box. He is looking at this file and he's thinking to himself, okay, how can I make maybe even f5 work? How can I be as annoying to the g6 pawn as possible? And he realizes that f5 may work if, as soon as black takes on f5, his rooks can come in and start wreaking havoc on the 7th file, on the 7th rank. My apologies. You guys can probably already see where this is going. To make rook g7 work, we need another piece to help us, which is going to be which piece? Bishop. The bishop, right? Yeah. So the bishop gets transferred to b2, from which is going to be a perfect helper. Now, this move evokes immediate reaction from Mikhail Botvinnik. Deservingly so, because as soon as the bishop ends up on b2, this is going to happen. This is going to happen, and black is not going to love it. So at this point, after bishop c1, Botvinnik responds with this move e5, essentially saying that, okay, if you want to take on e5, you're activating my knight. Now my knight is suddenly an attacking piece, and that's good. If you don't want to take, and if you want to play f5, this trade is going to happen still, and trades are good for black, because black is the one defending. Yeah. And if white does nothing, which is kind of the thing that Petrosian did here, which is another reason why I like this example so much. He played bishop c1. He drew e5, and then he went back to e3, which essentially doesn't really do much as of right now. But you guys will see momentarily why this is such a powerful plan. As black have played e5, they now have responsibility. The e5 pawn becomes a responsibility. It's very unlikely that black wants to take on f4, because after, oh wait, it's unlikely, but it did happen. Funny Ilya. Black taking on f4 means that the bishop on f4 begins to completely cut off any of the black knight's possible movement squares. So obviously e5 is unavailable, d6 just looks awkward, h6 doesn't do much for black. The bishop on f4 is doing a good job applying pressure against c7 and keeping the knight on f7 at bay. So rook d7 happened now, but Botvinnik is just playing a waiting game here, essentially saying that, oh well, yes, you did get your pawns undoubled. I took on f4, but now what are you gonna do next? You have good pieces. You lost your original idea. What's gonna happen now? And suddenly, rook to d2 happens, which leads to a rook trade. This means that Petrosian is essentially giving up on his original idea of applying as much pressure against the g6 as possible, and now he pivots into a different type of play. But why? Why is this pivot even possible? Well, because by undoubling the pawns, Petrosian has created the pass pawn. Now his target is, or his goal is to help the pass pawn promote. So he does it. He brings his pieces as close to the center, actually goes to e2, which I didn't really understand. Like, king to e3 seemed a little bit more precise to me, but he played king e2. Eventually, the bishop got pulled back to e3, and then pawns went all the way up. So I guess there was some kind of idea on keeping the e3 square unoccupied. Hello, Sam. So Botvinnik responds with c5. Now a5 comes through. So a5 is an attempt to create an additional infiltration side. Yeah. Once this trade comes through, the a file is now available. White does not really want to try and fight for the d file because it leads to an additional trade. Yeah. Whenever we are playing in an endgame, we always need to remember that even in endgames where we are up material, sometimes just mindlessly trading pieces is not the right answer. Some people, even people that I know very well and work with, they sometimes walk into this state of mind that oh well, we are ahead, so we need to trade no matter what. But in reality, you only need to trade if you are uncomfortable, right? If you believe that your opponent's pieces are better than yours, that's when you need to trade. Yeah. Otherwise, if you perceive your pieces to be better, they're going to be better off being kept on the board. So this is that moment where we don't want to overtrade. We do still have a very, very good bishop on f4, but now we don't have a rook to go along with it. So when it comes to pushing the pawn, you see, the problem is that our pawn will possibly never cross the e6 square. Why is that? Well, black is going to have a piece there, a king or a knight, and we don't have a piece to attack that light square. We don't have a rook to help us, right? So at this point, yes, we probably are still better, but can we win this position? Very unlikely. We are lacking pieces to help us. So a5 comes through. Now rook goes to a1 and gets ready to infiltrate through the a file. In endgame, in most endgames, your king belongs in the center. So that's exactly what black does. Goes ahead and plays the move king to g7. Now rook a6. This position will involve a lot of shaking around. So white has shaken black into opening up the a file. Now white has to shake black into making sure their pawns are loose. This is why Botvinnik does not play b5, because b5 means that the pawns are very difficult to defend. Goes rook b7, and now rook a8. Seemingly, nothing is really happening. But again, it's just calm before the storm. King f6 comes through. Rook c8. The rook is clearly trying to end up on c6. So Botvinnik says, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to go ahead and play knight e5. And now king e3. It would be kind of funny. The king e3 has a funny threat. Can somebody please tell me what the threat is? Somebody from the audience. If black makes like a random move, let's say rook a7, slide zugzwang. Yes, this is exactly what Petrosian is going for. Petrosian is trying to stretch his opponent's defenses thin until they no longer have a good move to defend themselves with. So this is getting into that kind of territory where black is starting to suffocate. So let's say if black goes rook a7, this move actually in its essence makes a lot of sense. The rook is trying to get active, trying to go ahead and apply some pressure against b3. This move would now be losing on the spot. How so? Bishop g5 check, and now I'm just gonna go ahead and play maybe king f7. Yes, correct. Take the knight on e5, force the king into the good central square, and trap it with rook c6. A very simple threat of f4 cannot really be stopped. Well, I mean, it can be delayed. Yeah, black can play rook f7, but then we can just take on g6, and then f4 would win us the rook. Rook g5, kicking the king out, and it's all over. Yeah. So this is getting, you see, this is getting a little bit scary. One might think that, oh well, it's impossible to get yourself mated in the middle of the board, but yes, sometimes it is. When the pieces fall in the right places, your king, even though it's supposed to be near the center, it actually needs to be close to the center, but not too close. Yeah, because you may end up falling into a trap like this. Obviously, Botvinnik easily spots this threat, goes knight d7. But now rook c6, and now white has full control over the 6th rank. It's actually going to be very important. This control is going to be very, very helpful for black's attempt to push their pawn all the way down. So king f7 happens, and now e5. No need to wait. e5 may feel rushed because now black can kinda have a blockade going, but it doesn't really work out for black, and I'll show you why. So knight f8, only move to stop e6. White goes rook f6. Obviously, we are not waiting for black to play knight e6. As soon as black goes knight e6, chances are that we're going to run out of steam. So we want to make sure that we refute the knight e6 as much as possible. So rook f6, king g7. Now, if king ends up on e7, knight e6 leads to material losses. Also, after king e7, we have bishop g5, and the king would have to keep running. So Botvinnik plays king g7, and this is kind of where we are beginning to see that black was working towards central control, but now the king is essentially forced out of the center, making defense even more so complicated. So king g7, king e4 comes through. The difference in king powers is stunning. White's king is about to get to d5 and then possibly to c6, while black's king is still on g7 doing absolutely nothing. So at this point, Botvinnik got impatient, played b5, loosened up the pawns. Rook c6 came through, and then the pawn fell. The c5 pawn fell, which may also feel like a waste, right? Because it feels like we're almost done playing e6, but it's actually is very difficult for black to hold this defensive formation. Knight does come through and goes to e6, rook d5 happens, and the problem, or one of the problems for black here, is that the b5 is always under attack, and there is no good way to defend it. If the pawn ends up on b4, it actually just gets easily captured because it's on a dark square. So this defensive formation only works so long as white doesn't target certain things like b5 pawn. So for example, king e7, bishop e3, and once again, black cannot really do much about this. Moving the knight away from e6 immediately leads to black losing the e6 square control. So for example, knight c7, bishop g5, wherever the black king goes, we have either rook d7 check or rook d6. I guess in this case it's going to be rook d7, and the game just ends. Yeah, king e8, e6. Oh, wait, actually e6 is a blunder by me. I'm blundering knight takes e6 because there is a there is the fork, yeah, of knight c5. So probably not being impatient, going rook e7 first, king moves, and then we go e6, and then the rest of the pieces follow. King e5, rook f7, etc. So black goes ahead and plays rook b8, playing a waiting game. Rook d6 comes through, and now b4. I guess there is a way for white to make progress. Yeah, just f4, f5. If the rook keeps juggling itself on the b file, on b7 and b8 squares respectively, we will eventually go f4, f5. The trade is going to come through, and the e6 knight will have no choice but to leave. Also, as our king is getting towards the king side, the h5 becomes a pretty plausible target. Yeah, so there is actually no way to hold this defensive formation. So Botvinnik tries for some activity, goes b4, tries to activate the rook as much as possible, but it's just to no avail. f4, f5 comes through, and Botvinnik just realizes that it's hopeless. He will have to resign, because after takes, knight, let's say knight g7, maybe hoping for some checks, some last resort. It's just it doesn't work. King g6, bishop h6 next. The king is not gonna stay safe on f8. So rook e5, let's say we're already winning material after bishop h6. So this is the suffocating endgame technique of Tigran Petrosian that I like so much, and obviously this is the example number 3, and I cannot really hold back the the example or the technique that Tigran Petrosian is mostly known for, which is his defense. Yeah, Tigran is the kind of player that wouldn't lose many games because of his defensive capabilities, and that is what he is known worldwide for. But once again, this lecture is about him being actually a very good versatile player, despite of what he is known for in the chess world. And these are all the examples that I had about it, and this is my final example, which kind of demonstrates how good Tigran really was in his defenses. So this was his game against Garry Kasparov. I'm not sure if this was a match game or just an individual game, but rook b7 seems a bad move after the final analysis. Rook b7 seems one second. Let's go back. Let's pull back for a second. And rook b7. At what point? Rook b7. Where did rook b7 happen? Are you sure you're talking about rook b7? Rook b7. Okay, so here, I guess in this case. Which book for Petrosian's annotated games do you recommend? I wouldn't recommend. Well, there is a book. There is a Petrosian's King's Indian defense book that I studied, and I partially studied King's Indian defense by reading that book, and that's the one I would recommend you guys check out. It's a good starter for the King's Indian defense players from both white and black sides. It's a book that gave me the most insight on what kind of player Petrosian is, and also I was able to immediately utilize some of the opening ideas, which was a win-win. After rook a6, so yeah, after rook a6, rook b7 does feel like this was a crying attempt to keep material, right? To keep material, and probably black should have tried for b5, and maybe even giving up the pawn immediately would give black a higher chance of surviving. That's a good point. Yeah, I agree with you. So another good point about these endgames is that material is rarely going to be worth it if your pieces are all stuck and defensive. Yeah, if your pieces are defensive and you're trying to hold onto your material as it's as it's your dear life, chances are you will eventually lose and get overwhelmed, because material, once again, rarely matters. What matters is how active your pieces are and how well you can use them. And that's exactly the difference here. Try to defend 2 versus 3. Yeah, yes, exactly. I completely agree. I believe that this is indeed the right way for black. Just give up these pawns. Don't make your rook overly passive on b7. Make sure the rook can and will be coming out after rook c6. Maybe here takes, and rook a7, trying to be as annoying as possible, trying to check and whatnot. So yeah, I do agree. This is a good point. I should have mentioned this in my analysis. Okay, so let's go back to this position right here, and this is move 35 of Kasparov versus Petrosian's game in 1981. So quite some time ago, and at this point, Petrosian is just getting pummeled, as you guys can tell. He is up. What is he up? A pawn. He's only up a pawn, a mere pawn, and yet White's play is tremendous. Every single piece in White's position is looking towards the Black King, and honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I would probably start panicking. You know, if I ever find myself in a spot like this, it's really difficult to bullets are flying. Bullets are flying from every direction, and you have to be Neo. You have to be dodging everything. You have to protect yourself as much as you can. And in my mind, the last thing I would be thinking about in cases like these is, doing something along the lines of, oh well, our king is being unsafe. Let's move it towards the center, right? Where it's going to be even more unsafe. But surprisingly, it is the only way for Black to survive. The king cannot be safe on b7 as there's too many threats. So the king actually needs to take its defense into its own hands. And the only move, once again, to survive is to go king c6, which is completely bizarre, and it's even more impressive that Petrosian managed to find this move, also knowing how these games were being played with adjournment. So move 35 means that it's likely that both Garry Kasparov and Tigran Petrosian didn't really have much time left at this point, because they would have to play 5 more moves until the games were adjourned, and then the games would resume. So after king c6, Kasparov, I guess, was taken aback by Black's decision to move the king up, and played rook b to a3 here, which is actually a beginning of the end. This move seems seems good on paper, but in reality, because it involves trading. So after taking on a6, White will have to be trading a pair of rooks. So this move actually doesn't lead to anything. After rook b takes ba3, b takes c4. So just taking the knight, just being completely at phase. The king is in the middle of everything. Rook takes a6. Rook takes, and simple bishop b6. It feels like there should be some kind of finisher. It feels like there should be some kind of tactic, but somehow Black is just defending, right? The knight on d7 is the hero. If not for this knight, White would just have queen takes b6, as the d5 knight is currently pinned. So Kasparov tries for bishop c5, and now queen to d8, joining in the queen into the defense. White has officially run out of steam. There is no more pieces that White can pull up to the attack. So queen a1 was tried, but this just leads to more material losses. After knight takes c5, this is probably where the game was adjourned, but at this point there's actually no reason to play any further, because White only has 2 pieces attacking, and pretty much every Black's piece is near the king, so nothing's going to happen. At this point, Garry Kasparov decided to surrender, which is actually he surrendered after making the move rook a4, which just allows Black king to run all the way back to safety into the king side. So looks like today I'm actually way ahead on time. I was in too much of a hurry and finished a little bit early, but I would love to maybe answer some of the questions. If anybody has any questions about any of these examples I've shown today, I will be happy to answer. Anyone? No? What about you, chat? Nobody? If not, I'll pass the torch to my good friend Grandmaster Denes Boros, who is going to be doing chess psychology, I guess. No?
No,
not today.
Breaking
moves.
games from
Breaking moves. Okay, yeah. Well, I guess there's going to be probably going to be a little break before Denes takes over, but he'll be doing another lecture on breaking moves. Stay tuned for that. And thank you for joining my lecture today. I will be back next week on Tuesday. Thank you, and have a rest of your day. Have a good rest of your day.
Hello everyone and welcome. We are going to have a special one because we're going to talk about the Queen of Chess. Now, Queen of Chess is actually on Netflix now. So Judit Polgar, obviously I'm talking about her, and she had a long and adventurous life as a prodigy, one of the first ones to eclipse Fischer's record, which is actually very special. Now, this whole documentary, I don't know, any of you seen it yet or seen? Is on the watch list? Good. It should be on the watch list. It actually talks a bit about Judith's life as a prodigy and her sisters. So if you're unfamiliar with Judith, she is one of the first female prodigies in chess, and it was something that we can quote-unquote say an experiment, because both of her parents decided that Susan, Sophia, and Judith are equally capable of becoming a fantastic player regardless of their gender. And in fact, they did succeed. And in 1988, when they were all teenagers, them, including Methodical, they won the Thessaloniki Olympiad. So even in the chess world, we have Olympiads. It's very specific to chess. It's kind of like the Summer Olympics, but specifically on chess. So yeah, you can find it on Netflix. It tells a specific story, but I do want to highlight her talents. And when we talk about Judith, what are our first thoughts? Judit Polgar. Polgar. About her style, yes, or personality. I'm all ears. How would you describe her?
Pretty aggressive, pretty tactical.
Pretty aggressive, pretty tactical. Yes. She is indeed Magyar, Hungarian. So we're going to see one of the games that's quintessential Judit Polgar. Very creative, very aggressive, and inventive. And then I do want to take a look at another game that's something that's not as well known about her. Stylistically, it's something that's sort of in the shadows. Also, one other thing that I did want to mention, yes, good point there by Chess Lover, broken down many barriers in chess. She's obviously a chess grandmaster, and she was also top 10 in the world, overall in the world. So what's exciting about her is her aggressive style and also her accomplishments. So when you'll check out that documentary, it's going to focus a lot on her matchup with Garry Kasparov, one of the best players of all time. I mean, there are some good players out there and great players, like Vishy Anand, who's like probably third-time best with Paulsen. And what's fascinating that all of these players, Judith beat all of them. Now, Karpov, who's also among the greatest ones, she beat him with black. And I'm listing all these accomplishments because there's just so many of these that just couldn't, it's a documentary. You can't have that much time to explain everything. In my humble opinion, she could have been even top 5 if she had all the study materials that we have today. The difference between chess today and chess in the 80s and 90s is that you had to do your own work on chess, or you had to have a team. One of the things that was very unique from the Polgar family is that they actually built a system. They built the first databases by hand, which later transformed into something different and became something online. But the original databases and these files, physical files, were made by the Polgars. And that's how they prepared for their matchups in their future games. So it's completely different now, but it just shows that she actually worked on her game, but what made her succeed was her sheer talent. Without talent, it's very difficult. But let's take a look at this game. She's around 13, 14 when this game is played against Grandmaster Hans. So e4, c5. The first opening moves, I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds, but this is called the Sicilian defense, one of Judit's favorites. Also, most of the Polgars' favorites, they almost exclusively played the Sicilian. Also a Kasparov favorite. d4 takes and d6. So this is the Scheveningen or Scheveningen, depending of where you're from. This has been played in the match between Karpov and Kasparov. And, well, some of you know, but, you know, I do want to ask you all, watching and in person, what do you think is the most aggressive way of playing in this position for white? You could check, but for now, black is most likely going to block either with the bishop or the knight. F4 is pretty aggressive, but F4 kind of prepares E5, but black is actually ready for that. But you're getting really close. You can definitely go queenside castle, which is called the English attack. G4. So E5 is a bit early because I will capture you. Yeah, it's a bit too early, yes. G4. Now, she doesn't go for the Keres attack. This is named after Paul Keres, an incredibly strong player. And the whole point is that black is fairly solid in the middle, and this knight is putting a lot of pressure on the pawn. If white manages to push that knight away, then white is going to have the initiative, the free-flowing attack, and no pressure on white's only weakness on e4. Now, she had plenty of success playing g4, but remember, Judit is 14 at this time. So she's not going for the most aggressive one. She's going for the more classical approach of bishop e2, which is by no means wrong. It is a little bit more sound and solid. a6, castles, bishop e3, castles, f4, queen c7. So we're looking at a classical Scheveningen position, and well, by now theory has expanded greatly. So at this moment you could argue, well, there's thousands of games, how can you say we're out of the opening? But at that moment it's still kind of a fresh position. So my question is, how can Judit try to start getting some attack going? And by the way, don't be shy. If you have an idea, don't. And G4 is not at all as bad as you may expect. Now, we kind of learned that you don't want to move pawns in front of your king, but these positions are different than like normal open positions, because this is what we call like semi-open ones. There's no immediate way for black to punish us. But I do have to ask you this fairly straightforward question, and this is about chess principles. It's kind of like, it's sort of like Sun Tzu for all those people who love the art of war. We have these sayings. So if you play on the side, how could, or how should rather, our opponent punish us? Break in the center. So these are like these chess sayings, and they're very important. Sometimes you can just fall back to them and they'll give you the answer. Here, you have two options. You either can push this pawn or this pawn, if you're following this old adage. My question is, which one would you choose? And this is the moment to be brave. You absolutely have 50% chance to be absolutely correct. D? Okay. Anyone else want to take a chance? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd probably say E, just so you get the double.
E, okay. Yeah. What? Which one would you choose, D or E?
I don't need to. I'm just wondering, are you talking about white or black?
I'm talking about black. So I actually pointed with these arrows, either this D pawn push or E pawn push. And sorry to put you on the spot, but I am curious. Which one would you choose? Would you choose the D pawn or would you choose the E pawn? E? Okay.
Yeah, E5.
Ben, Sir Ben Simon, which pawn would you choose, the D pawn or the E pawn?
E.
E? Okay. So if you said E, I'm very sorry. Unfortunately, we're not kind of ready for that yet. There's a lot of point in playing either way. E makes sense because you attack. If you have a double attack, you oftentimes will have a great situation. If you have a triple attack, you're going to have a field day. And even though you have a triple attack here, the only reason you're not just celebrating is that I'm able to cover. I'm actually moving the attacked piece and covering this pawn on G4. So I'm actually defending two things with one single move. But this is an outlier move. This is very rare. So you should mostly assume that if you attack two things at the same time, that they will not have a move that defends both. But it's good to know that there are exceptions. If
Are we saying that after bishop takes, G takes, we are worse at black because now the G file is semi-open and the rook's coming after king H1?
so, yeah, so you could take with the. Go ahead.
No, I was saying that he can take with the other pawn. He can push and attack both pieces still.
So, very good point. You could take with either, but E takes actually is even more promising because the whole point of you pushing these pawns in this type of Sicilian positions is to roll the pawns. So if you take with the G pawn, your idea is not breaking through. And when E takes, bishop takes, or rook takes, it really doesn't matter. Although usually you should capture with the bishops, because rooks are easier targets. But the problem that black face is that I'm going to roll my G pawn once the knight has to move. So if white ever gets the chance to land that eagle on d5, problems occur because you can't break free. Black's typical breaking move is d5, and if I actually manage to block it with my knight, you're technically lost. If you play it perfectly with white, black is losing. And now you can see why black usually wants to keep the knight on f6, whatever it takes. Usually like these Luft moves, like h6. Any of you familiar with this term Luft? And if you do, please educate me. It's a free game. L-U-F-T. That's how you spell it. It's a German word. It's a borrowed term for anyone here in America. It literally means air. And the reason they call it the air, because it gives air for the king to breathe. And if you've been back rank checkmated before, then now you understand why Luft means air and why we use this term in the chess terminology. And here it's very good. Now, usually you move the side pawns a little bit, like a little wrinkle, instead of the other pawns, because if you move like this pawn, then the French guy is going to intercept you, and I'm going to take you en passant. And then your king side is going to get damaged. But okay, let's go back to the game. Here d5 would be like that typical move, and these typical breaking moves are often pretty good, with the idea of actually trying to fight back in the center. So takes. Indeed, there are airplanes called and airlines called Lufthansa. But black is unperturbed, and this is one of those things. It's a very unique experience for these grandmasters, these seasoned grandmasters, to face a teenage prodigy. She's 14. The opponent is nearing 40s. So for them, they don't know if they should treat this game or how to treat this game properly. So rook e8 is sort of that hesitating move, but it's also not a bad one at that. It tries to over-defend the e-pawn. Now, ladies and gentlemen, how should we continue? So we played just g4 as Judit and rook e8. And by the way, just a little bit of a disclaimer while you all think, we're going to have a book signing on the chess campus, actually on the other side at the Hall of Fame. Kyla Zhao, she's going to be signing her books, May the Best Player Win. I definitely advise you to check her book out and that event out. She is going to have a discussion on her book. She's a chess player as well. And if you have questions, she'll be happy to answer those. And there'll be also free play there. It's going to be in February 28th, 1 p.m. So, what should we do here? What would you play here as white? Simple as G5, yes. H4 is also not yeah, not bad at all.
Distinguish attack a lot. And I struggle with situations like this where there are, I know where my next 4 moves are. So I know it's G5, H4, Queen E1, King H1, bring the rook, right? I have the, how do you pick one?
So, chess is a game for two. I know I'm going to shock everyone with that statement. But you kind of try to read the room whenever you're playing the game. So, whatever Hans Reed does here kind of tells you of what you can get away with. So, if they're trying to start pressing your pieces in the middle, moving your queen away is not bad. And before you criticize yourself, it's not bad. I would put in a category of risky because you're not paying attention to your opponent's ideas. Therefore, you're prone to make a mistake. So the ideal scenario would be is that you take a look whether your opponent's move is threatening to your plan and then play accordingly. If you feel, well, it doesn't scare you enough, then you may as well just continue, move your queen or push the pawn. Or if you say, okay, I don't like what's happening, you are actually trying to respond to the threats and come up with a different plan that responds to it. But if rook e8 and rook e8 is not really doing anything, it's not attacking you, you can actually kind of say, okay, coast is clear, I can just follow my own plan. And therefore, as you guys all mentioned, G5. Now, I do want to go out and mention this H4 idea. You could try to do that, but it's kind of like your opponent makes a soft move, you make a soft move, and you kind of balance it out. So if your opponent is not on the ball necessarily, you might want to punish it. And someone asked the book title is May the Best Player Win by Kyla Zhao. It's not, the best player isn't called May. The best player of all time is called Garry Kasparov. Garry Kasparov. Okay? I'm not going to repeat it again. So G5, knight D7, rook E8 is not a bad move. It's just not aggressive enough. Strategically, it's sound. But here, Judit plays a move that is going to break and shatter Black's position into pieces. And this is your typical Judit type of play, very creative, and sometimes very unusual, something that you don't see that often. Like the Scheveningen is known, it's a known variation, but Judit's next move is somewhat surprising. And in fact, the rook on e8 is her target. So the question I will ask you, can you try to find Judit's somewhat unusual, you could even call it somewhat bizarre idea? Some people are trying to question. Nobody questioned Garry's being the GOAT. With that,
Well, we agree.
yeah, no, Chet is trying to pick a fight, but there's no fight. We already decided. Yes, go ahead. Oh, okay, okay. But first, we have to bring the fight to the board. Yes, go ahead. So this knight moved to d7. If that was your question. So, yeah, so what we're looking for here, so g5, knight d7. So that's what we're trying to figure out.
Did she move the knight to in front of the black queen?
You mean here?
Yeah.
So if you go there, that's a very typical knight sacrifice. Kudos for looking for it. Unfortunately for now, black would capture with the pawn. And even though sometimes they go there, which, remember your idea, because we might use that later, but for the moment, they would just capture us. Yes, it's going to be a bishop move. Well, so we're trying to take advantage of that fact that that rook is undefended. And in fact, in some cases, X-rays are magical. If you go bishop g4, it doesn't really do too much to the rook. Black might just go bishop f8. Bishop h5. Very, very beautiful little geometrical move. And black can't just ignore white completely. If you go here, oh, a little tactical trick. Judit is very known to be tactical, and then you win the rook. So black decides to block it off, but that comes with weakening his king side. Now if you go knight f8, then I go f5, and then I start attacking, and with no knight occupying the outpost, nobody's really actually claiming that black has enough compensation. The pawn storm is coming, and you don't have a piece to plonk on e5. So g6.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Why? So you told us that bishop g4 doesn't work.
I'm not saying bishop g4 does not work.
Saying they could
Yeah.
move the bishop back.
Uh-huh.
Why couldn't they do the bishop back in the same position?
Which position?
So as opposed to moving the knight or moving the pawn, why don't you move the bishop to f8? Would that work at all as a defense?
Oh, here.
Yeah.
So then the thing is that I will have this sacrifice. Takes, check. You can't really run away because I will win your rook. And if you go here, I will have the attack and 2 pawns for the piece. And that's actually what makes this move so unique. Now, bishop h5 is not completely new. There are a couple of games, but not more than a dozen. So g6, knight c6. And you already kind of mentioned that, oh, we love to go knight d5, but we can't do it right now. And for that, we need to clear it. How can we clear the road for Judith's pony to d5? f5, I might take your knight, because I will try to trade as much as possible. And then get my knight on e5, and once I get a knight on e5 and I don't blunder my e6 pawn, it's not easy. So we are looking for a clearing sacrifice. Yep. Where would you sacrifice the knight? E6, obviously. Knight takes e6. And that's what I'm saying. Never give up on your ideas. Just because knight d5 didn't work earlier doesn't mean that you don't want to play on the same concept later. And that's actually what Judith does. She's like, okay, I want to get my knight on d5, but first I sacrifice my knight, which is worth 3 pawns for 2 pawns, but it doesn't matter because Rihans's king is incredibly sussy over there. Knight d5, queen b8, bishop f7, rook f8, check, but it's a very, very deadly one. The king literally can't move. You will have to give back a knight. And wherever you put your pieces, I'm going to capture you. So in fact, she's going to gain some material. Knight takes, pawn takes, d takes. How do we decide between bishop takes and knight takes? As you may notice in this position, black's king is running out of squares. The bishops are better at controlling squares. If you're trying to checkmate, bishops are much better. Knights are very powerful when you're trying to double attack or you're trying to set up an immediate threat. Bishops control more squares. So in this case, Judith wanted to control all these white squares, and she's going to control it long enough for her to set up this bishop d4 mating pattern. That's why she chose the knight sacrifice instead of the bishop. So knight e5, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop c5, king g7. Bishop takes e7, queen a7 check, king h1. Usually you want to bring your king behind your pawns. Now, black is way behind in this position, does one last desperado, and after the next move, after Judith's next move, black resigns. So I want to see you guys find the finishing touch before we move on to the second game. So one of the interesting things about chess is that oftentimes we just say, oh, I'm winning, and kind of give up on trying to find the winning move, the checkmating move. But what I'm trying to invite you to do is to look at this position and imagine how you could checkmate here. So let's say you're playing Buckhouse or a game of Magic where you could put this queen anywhere you'd like to. Where would you put that queen as white? Queen f6. You'd love to get this queen over to f6. If it could magically land on f6, it'd be checkmate. Now, it's not a bad idea to use this magical thinking and then use it as a tool. Now you know what you want to accomplish. How could you get there without dropping any material? Queen f3, of course, and it is a G yo. If you go queen d6, black can still try to weasel out with rook takes f7. I'm not saying white has a shot here, but queen f3 is smoother and cleaner by Judith. And it doesn't matter if you take anything. Hop, mate. Quite a glorious checkmate, but as per usual, you don't always see the mates on the board in classical games. But it's still quite nice, so I wanted to put it on the board. Okay, so let's move on to game number 2 that I wanted to show you. And it's somewhat special. What makes this game special is that you're going to see the side of Judit Polgar that nobody really talks about. And in fact, she's mostly proud of this part of her chess. Her technique and her skills in the third phase of the game. Not going to spoil which phase that is. All right, so let's take a look quickly at the opening, although we're not going to spend too much time on that. So e4, e6 is the French variation. It's been very popular in the 80s, early 90s, a bit in the 70s. In fact, world champion Botvinnik played it a lot as the reigning champion. So e6, d4, d5. There's 2 ways of playing this position. Well, I mean, 2 very ambitious ways, and there's a third one. Knight d2 is a favorite of Karpov. It's a very solid way of playing. But the most challenging is either to close down the bishop, and that's actually one thing you may want to pay attention to when you're looking at a position. You want to pay attention whether your opponent's pieces are strong enough or not. This bishop is locked in, therefore that can be some sort of an advantage for white. In fact, Judit does play this one, the advanced, later in her career, but then reverts to the more ambitious move, the knight c3 one. And in fact, this game is played much later, like 5-6 years later compared to the previous game that I showed you guys. Her game is going to mature a lot. And her style, still tactical, but you'll see it's more versatile than from her teenage years. Bishop b4, the Winawer variation, a3, queen g4. There is one line called the poison pawn variation. One rabbit hole you may want to check out if you're getting acquainted to chess. Look up all the variations which are called poison pawn variations. There are going to be plenty of those, and many of them are fascinating. And one of them is Fischer related. That's the bonus one. This one is more Tal related. C takes, and in fact, knight e2 is the main line. But as far as I remember, king d1 was also played by Mikhail Tal against none other than Botvinnik. But in this game, Gdanski chooses castling, which was popular at that time. Knight g6, queen c7, a4. a4 is somewhat unusual move by Judit, but Judit definitely is not someone who shies away from playing creatively. And I think that's something to do yourself, especially if you're starting out. Try your hand, try your luck, because sometimes you don't know how good you are. And I'm being serious. If you have an idea, try it. You might be a better player than you think of yourself. And with engines, sometimes you can check after your game whether your idea was correct or not. And sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised. So c4, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen h3. Okay, so just a little bit of a discussion here. If you're looking at this position, which side of the board you think Judit should be focusing on? The queen side or the king side?
The king side.
The king side. Why?
The principle of my pawns are pointing to the king side.
Okay, so your pawns are pointing to black's king, but there is also a little bit of a discrepancy in black's position that may be a giveaway.
Well, they have most of their pieces on the queen side.
They have most of their pieces on the queen side, but it's one thing to sort of decide that you're going to play on one side of the board, but you have to find a way to break through. The doubled pawns, exactly. So these double G pawns, this pawn, how can we probe that? Well, you can probe it eventually with rolling the H pawn up the board. Therefore, you'll always have this hook that will give you a chance to attack. So let's just look through what happens. Everyone is developing their pieces normally. H4, Judit, not unsurprisingly, is going that direction. H6, all natural. If she would push, then, of course, black wouldn't want to trade. Yes, yes, yes. So if you, so knight g5, yes. So it looks like you could win, but you would self-win yourself.
No, in the next position, so go back.
Yeah.
Here. So basically, if you move your pawn up to h4 and just try to get that file on h.
So that's something you can try. Not sure if it's enough, but also black doesn't have to take. So h4, h6, queen h3, rook f7, rook f1. Now, sometimes you think that classes and lectures that you see here at the St. Louis Chess Club are completely unrelated. Completely unrelated. But guess what? Psych, joke on you. There's actually something you could have learned from Ilya's class just an hour ago, and something, one specific idea you wouldn't be able to resist. And black could have tried it here. Hello, Andy. So black has a move. Petrosian, I guarantee you, would have a hard time resisting. Of course, is the famous exchange sacrifice. And because white doesn't really have an easy time breaking through, and this bishop is sort of locked in by its own pawns. And therefore, black has plenty of compensation in general. An advantage, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but definitely good play for black. Because black can slowly improve his position without white having a clear initiative. All right, so let's see what happened instead. Queen d8, a5, very methodical, and notice this, that Judit actually is in no rush to show her intentions. That's actually something that's also very much her style. When it comes to playing naturally, slowly, if she's got the time, she can actually take her time if needed. Knight c6, queen g4, just improving her queen. king h7. But the time is nigh for some action, because eventually you will have to create a weakness on the king side. What was the idea of rook f1? I would assume she wanted to make sure that the f pawn is defended in case this knight would jump. Knight g5, most likely black would just capture. I don't think we are ready for that sacrifice, even though it would be spectacular. h5, of course. Simple, but sometimes you don't have to do anything extraordinary. Now, of course, black doesn't want the trade because then I will have a free attack. So Gdanski goes g5. But you don't have to ask Judit twice if there's a chance for a spectacular little wrinkle. Now you sack, yes. She sacks the bishop. Because now the knight jumps in and double attacks. And h6. And h6 is also a very cool move, because again it shows that not only is she determined to play aggressively, but she's not afraid to play a more sort of a silent move. You could take on f7, but because, as one of you asked, well, why is the rook on f1? In this case, you could add an extra little pressure on black's position without actually clarifying your intentions. One of those things that I already kind of discussed, oftentimes you don't want your opponent to exactly know what you're trying to do, because they're going to try to sabotage you. And here, black will have to deal with different plans. So g6, now she takes, queen takes g6, and queen f8, f4, rook f5, and queen g7, forcing the trade of queens, and we get the ending. Now, traditionally, the bishop knight is considered better, but let's have a little bit of a pawn count, shall we? White has two pawns, practically speaking, because there's just no opposition for these guys. The only issue that Judit has is the e6 pawn. That's the only thing that's holding her onslaught of pawns up. Now, I talked a lot about the dark squared bishop, but this bishop on d7 is equally useless. In fact, I'm not even being fair with the dark squared bishop. White's bishop, we need it for the attack. In fact, we used it for that. But this bishop lacks target and lacks anything to do with. And for that reason, because these pieces can't coordinate enough to bother White's position, White's advantage is quite large. Okay, so we talked a little bit that Judit is going to play this part very systematically and patiently. So if we're just going to take a quick look and quick glance at this position, how could White manage to infiltrate Black's camp apart from the obvious g4 and I try to roll you with f5? Obviously, Black has the best defenses there. Rook b1, well, okay. I mean, I'm obviously going to defend my pawn on b7. Okay, so you could try to use The H file, you do have to tend with the weaknesses. But don't forget one important piece that actually becomes super strong in the ending.
Sure, you have to play king e3 first or king f3.
Okay, so you can definitely use your king as a defender, but you can even give something even more noble for him. You can use it also as an attacking piece. So this king actually, as you'll see, will venture enough and consider breaking through on that side. Now, black doesn't really have enough pieces to bother the king. And if you actually move this knight away to stop the infiltration, then that's one less defender on the f5 square. So what will Judit do is try to slowly stretch black's defenses. So let's see how she does it. So rook b1, very natural. Rook f3, rook f1. Fairly standard moves. Again, just patiently over-defending. She's just making sure she's not dropping anything. It's nothing specific. Rook g3 check, rook f3, with the idea of trading eventually. Rook h3, here it comes. Now you can't do this because this loses a piece. So even if you're in an ending, it doesn't mean tactics are off the table. So takes, king e3, g4. She doesn't care about that pawn for reasons. We'll come back to that one. King d2, and here she comes. Her king is walking all the way to the other side of the board. Rook g1, just over defending, and b6. And that's, again, what she wanted. She wanted black to soften the position. When the pawn is still on b7, this bishop is rock solid on c6. You can't actually break through. But once you go b6, no more fortresses that way. Say takes. Job's well done. King is walking back. k1, rook g2, king e3, king f3, and the king is walking the other side of the board, supporting the eventual break. King h4, rook f2. And you might be considering that, oh, Judit is just making random moves. None of that is true. Notice the options for black. Can the black king move? No. If the black king moves, I start rolling my pawn. Can the knight move? No. I roll my pawn again. So even though we made these moves kind of casually, she was setting up a scenario where black is getting into in some sort of zugzwang. Can't move without actually inducing another weakness. And that's exactly what she was playing for. So black has to do something with the bishop or the pawn. Rook b1, b5, rook c1. But she has, again, oceans of time. She doesn't have to do anything. So she makes his opponent suffer, her opponent. So rook f1 takes, rook here, and now black was like, oh my goodness, I'm munching on that pawn. But after rook f2, there's a rude realization here. You can't just go back to a4, because now I can push the pawn. If you go here, there's a brand new avenue for my rook that I never had before. This rook actually can show up and infiltrate, and it actually does so decisively. Her advantage by now is decisive. So bishop e4, rook b2.
I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Isn't going back and forth on B1 and C2?
Yeah, so she is moving around probing, just trying to create a target. And also after rook b, like b5, rook c1, she's actually giving the move for the Grandmaster playing black. You can't move neither of these without losing something, so the king or knight has to move. So she's giving the move away, so when she goes rook f1 now, she is threatening f5. So that's the point.
You know, I guess you want a flexible bishop, and this is kind of Josh, but when the bishop takes, you move up the rook up to the f2.
Yeah.
Can't you just drop back to b1?
To where?
Oh, never mind. You instantly b2.
Yeah. So bishop e4. Now she's going over. Rook takes. And now she sacrifices, opening up and having two extra passers. With the king being very close, pass pawns are only dangerous when the kings are really far or rooks are supporting them. But here, it's no such case, and this bishop is actually locked out by its own pawns, so it's not actually participating in the defenses. Check, g5, and again, it shows her good technique. The king of Judith's, she's covering all those squares that would let that bishop back in to defend. So everything is perfectly centered for the final breakthrough. Check. g6, f4. Now she goes e6. Probably king g5 is also near decisive. And black goes knight e7, hoping that something would happen, but he is about to face a rude awakening, because Judith's next move is deadly, glorious and deadly.
I could be wrong, but I feel like taking the bishop at a knight with a rook or just pushing the pawn.
So, of course, g7 comes to mind, but as you said, rook takes e7 is just cleanly winning. Judith played it. Point being, if you capture pawn g7 and you do not have any ways to stop me from promoting, and then this bishop is really just a lame duck caught off. And it doesn't matter that you're up a piece. She's going to promote, and therefore, after rook takes e7, Gdanski resigned. So I really hope you enjoyed this lecture. If you want to check out the documentary, it is The Queen of Chess. And that way you can find it. And hope you enjoyed your time watching this lecture. Thank you for coming, and thank you for watching.
That may be the saddest French bishop I've ever seen in my life.
It is a pretty sad one. Yeah. I wanted to show you guys this game because you see a lot of these beautiful ones from Judith, but never the methodical, super grandmaster, I'm going to slowly just squeeze the life out of you type of chess. But she is capable of that. And also, thank you, Simon.